When I look back, I think the hardest part of my journey wasn't the long nights or the financial risk. It wasn't the anxiety that came with each decision that could make or break everything I was working for. No, the hardest part was simply living under the heavy weight of my own family calling me a failure. There's something uniquely painful about hearing those words not from strangers, not from critics who don't know you, but from the people whose approval you once craved more than anything else. It started small, tiny jabs that felt like harmless teasing at first, a cousin smirking at my little business idea, an uncle asking if I'd finally give up and get a real job. Even my parents, who I know loved me in their own way, would sigh in that disappointed tone that said more than their words ever could. They'd tell me they were worried about my future, but what I heard underneath was, "We don't think you're ever going to make it." Those comments piled up year after year until they became a chorus in my mind, echoing every time I stumbled. I remember one family dinner especially clearly. My older brother was showing off photos from his new vacation home, passing his phone around the table while everyone congratulated him. When it came to me, someone half-jokingly asked, "So how's your, what do you call it, startup doing, still in the red?" Everyone laughed. I forced a smile, tried to laugh along, but inside I felt like a little kid again, shrinking under the weight of their expectations I was apparently failing to meet. What they didn't see was that I was fighting battles every single day just to keep my dream alive. They didn't see me lying awake at 3 a.m., doing mental math to figure out if I could pay my employees on time. They didn't see me taking phone calls in a tiny shared office space that I could barely afford, trying to sound confident when in truth I was terrified. They didn't see me skipping meals to save money, or working through holidays while they gathered together, laughing and carefree. And yet somehow, despite all of that, what hurt most was still that label they pinned on me, failure. It's strange how deeply the opinions of those closest to us can embed themselves in our psyche. I'd tell myself I didn't care what they thought, that I was doing this for me, for my vision, for the people I wanted to help through my business. But then I'd hear their voices again, casual, dismissive, disappointed, and it would twist like a knife. Doubt would creep in. Maybe they were right. Maybe I really was wasting my life chasing something that would never work out. But each time that doubt threatened to drown me, something inside me pushed back. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was this quiet belief that my life was meant for more than playing it safe. Either way, every jab, every smirk, every whispered comment behind my back only added fuel to a fire I couldn't put out. I decided if they were going to call me a failure, I'd let them, for now. Because deep down I was determined to prove, first to myself and then to them, that their judgment didn't get to write the final chapter of my story. I held onto that resolve through the darkest moments, clinging to it when it felt like the only thing keeping me afloat. It wasn't easy, but sometimes pain is the best teacher and doubt the best motivator. And in a strange way, their words shaped me just as much as my own dreams did, because every time they called me a failure, they unknowingly handed me one more reason to keep going, and so I did. At some point, I realized I was standing at a crossroads that went far deeper than my career or my business. It was about who I was going to let myself become in response to all the doubt and belittlement I'd absorbed over the years. Would I let their words turn me bitter and small, consumed by proving them wrong just for the sake of revenge? Or would I find a way to rise above it, to grow stronger and wiser, to build something meaningful not from spite, but from genuine purpose? I won't pretend it was an easy or enlightened choice at first. In the beginning, anger was a powerful motivator. Every sarcastic remark replayed in my head like fuel on a fire. I'd lie awake at night, imagining the day I could stand before them and throw their words right back in their faces. I craved that moment of vindication so badly, it almost became my reason for working. But somewhere along the way, I started to notice how heavy that anger was. It was like dragging a boulder behind me everywhere I went. It made every setback sting worse, every slow month feel like fresh proof that they were right. It was exhausting, and it was poisoning me from the inside out. So I made a decision, one that turned out to be far more powerful than any external achievement. I decided I wouldn't build my future on bitterness. Instead, I would let resilience be my foundation. I would learn to stand back up every time I got knocked down, not because I wanted to spite them, but because I believed in my own vision, even when nobody else did. It was about refusing to give up on myself regardless of who was or wasn't clapping for me. I started focusing less on what they might think and more on what I knew I was capable of. I stopped replaying old conversations in my head and instead replayed my goals, why I started, who I wanted to help, what impact I dreamed my work could have. I filled my mind with books, mentors, and stories of other people who had been laughed at before they were respected. I surrounded myself with those reminders because I needed them desperately, especially on the days when self-doubt threatened to drown me all over again. The most surprising part was how freeing it felt. Without the constant weight of needing to prove something to my family, I found more joy in the work itself. I noticed small victories again. A satisfied client, a day when sales ticked up, the simple pride of seeing an idea come to life. Each of those little moments was a quiet triumph, a private reassurance that I was on the right path, regardless of anyone else's opinion. Of course, their words didn't magically stop hurting overnight. Even as my business began to grow, even as I started seeing glimpses of success, I still sometimes wished they'd see my worth without needing a financial statement to validate it. But by then, I'd also come to understand that their inability to see my value said more about them than it ever did about me. It was their limitation, not mine, and that realization was everything. It meant I could finally stop carrying the burden of their expectations. I could keep moving forward, eyes fixed on my own horizon, heart steady in the knowledge that resilience was not just about enduring hardship. It was about choosing to stay soft and hopeful, even when the world tried to harden me. That's how I kept going, not with bitterness, but with an unshakable commitment to myself, to the dream I believed in long before anyone else ever would. If there's one part of this story people often overlook, it's just how relentless the grind really was. From the outside, later on, it looked like my company sprang up overnight, as if success just landed in my lap because I was somehow lucky or had the right connections. But anyone who's ever tried to build something from the ground up knows there's no magic to it. Just countless hours of unglamorous, gut-wrenching work that most people will never see. In the beginning, it was all about survival. I worked out of a cramped corner in a shared office space that reeked of stale coffee and desperation. My desk was a salvaged table, my chair wobbled, and the ceiling sometimes leaked when it rained. I took calls in stairwells to sound more professional, hoping the echo wouldn't give me away. I ate cheap instant noodles so I could stretch what little money I had, and I'd often skip meals altogether, telling myself it was because I was too busy, but deep down knowing it was also because I had to make sure every dollar went into keeping the business alive. There were nights I was so exhausted, I'd doze off at my laptop, wake up, and keep typing without even thinking. I didn't have the luxury of weekends or evenings off. Holidays blurred into regular days because my mind never truly switched off. Even when I tried to relax, My brain ran through invoices, deadlines, and that gnawing fear that one misstep could send everything crashing down. There were moments when I came painfully close to shutting it all down. A big client would pull out, a shipment would get delayed, an unexpected expense would empty my already thin bank account. I remember staring at spreadsheets late at night, feeling physically sick, wondering if I was dragging myself and everyone who had trusted me straight into a disaster. In those moments, the voices of my family telling me I was a failure came back louder than ever. It would have been so easy to walk away, to decide they were right all along. But every time I thought about quitting, something in me refused. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was that small, still voice deep inside that kept insisting I was building something worth fighting for. So I kept going. I found ways to cut costs even further, negotiated with suppliers like my life depended on it, because it did, and leaned hard on creativity to solve problems that money normally would have. When cash was tight, I offered equity or future deals. I learned to sell my vision with a conviction so fierce, people would buy in even if the numbers didn't yet justify it. Slowly, painfully, those relentless efforts began to pay off. A client would send a referral, then another. We delivered projects that impressed, and word started to spread. The day we broke even was one of the quietest yet most profound victories of my life. No one threw a party. I didn't even tell my family. I just sat there for a long time, feeling the incredible weight of finally being able to breathe without the immediate fear of drowning. What people fail to see is that behind every overnight success is usually years of uncelebrated struggle. My story was no different. It was built on sleepless nights, relentless problem solving, countless failures that taught me more than any success ever could. And through it all, I discovered something invaluable. The grind doesn't just build your business, it builds you. I wish I could tell you there was a single cinematic moment when everything changed, some dramatic unveiling where I stood at a podium and announced to my stunned family that I now owned their empire, but life rarely plays out with that kind of perfect script. In reality, it unfolded slowly, almost quietly, over a series of milestones that seemed small on their own, but together told a story even I couldn't quite believe was real. As my company grew stronger, the opportunities that once felt out of reach started to knock at my door. We moved from that tiny shared office to a modest space of our own, then to an even bigger one, where I finally had a real conference room and a view that didn't look out over a brick wall. Each step felt like pulling myself one rung higher out of a deep, dark well. Along the way, we began to notice gaps in the market needs that weren't being met by companies that had grown complacent, businesses too comfortable or too arrogant to innovate. That was when everything began to change. One of those companies happened to be part of the very empire my family had always bragged about. The same business they used to measure my failures against their successes was now struggling under the weight of poor leadership and outdated thinking. I'd hear whispers at industry events about missed deadlines, about client dissatisfaction, and part of me felt almost guilty for how satisfying it was to watch. But the bigger part of me saw an opportunity, and I wasn't about to let old family ties cloud my judgment. So I made my move. My team and I worked tirelessly on a proposal that would let us acquire their struggling division, one that was still large enough to be impressive on paper, but bleeding money behind the scenes. It wasn't personal, it was business. It was also the very definition of poetic justice. I remember sitting in the boardroom across from their executives, some of whom knew my last name and made the connection immediately. Their polite smiles turned to thin lines, their eyes scanning me with a kind of wary confusion. They probably wondered how the kid they once considered a nobody had maneuvered himself into the position of being their solution or their replacement. When the deal closed, there was no parade, no confetti. I signed the final papers with hands that were steady on the outside, but trembling with a lifetime of pent-up emotion on the inside. I walked out of that building feeling taller than I ever had in my life, not because I was reveling in revenge, but because it felt like the final, undeniable validation of every long night, every sacrifice, every moment I refused to give up when it would have been so much easier to walk away. Word, of course, traveled back to my family, the same people who had once teased me at dinner tables, who had rolled their eyes and whispered under their breath about my pipe dreams, now had to process the fact that I had not only made it, but had bought into the very world they once used to measure my inadequacy. Some reached out, awkwardly trying to congratulate me as if there had never been any doubt. Others kept their distance, maybe out of pride, maybe out of shame. Either way, I didn't need their applause anymore. What I needed and finally had was the unshakable certainty that I had done exactly what I set out to do, not to spite them, not to rub it in their faces, but to fulfill the promise I made to myself on all those lonely nights when failure seemed certain, and the only voices I could hear were telling me I wasn't enough, because standing there, holding the keys to what once stood as their symbol of success, I finally understood I had always been enough. When the dust settled after the acquisition, I found myself sitting alone in my office late one evening, staring out the window at the city lights below. It should have been the most triumphant moment of my life, by every metric the world uses to measure success, money, power, influence. I had arrived. I owned the very business my family once praised as proof of their own legacy, the same one they used to compare against my supposed failings. I had done what they never imagined I could, but strangely in that quiet moment I felt a different sort of pull, one that went deeper than victory. Because success, I came to realize, isn't as simple as proving people wrong. It isn't just about balance sheets or how big your name appears on a building. True success is far more personal. It's about proving something to yourself, about discovering your own capacity to endure, to rise, to stay true to your vision even when everyone else turns their back. For so long, I thought I was chasing money, chasing stature, chasing that look of approval I used to search for on my father's face. But once I finally reached that elusive summit, it became clear that none of those external things could fill the places inside me that longed to be whole. In the months that followed, members of my family began to circle back into my life in subtle ways. A cousin sent a stiff congratulatory message over social media. An aunt invited me over for tea, carefully avoiding the years of condescension that had led us here. Even my parents, who once tiptoed around my career as if it were a shameful secret, began mentioning me with a kind of hesitant pride to their friends. Part of me wanted to bask in it, to finally hear them say, "We were wrong about you. We're proud of you." But another part of me, a part that had grown stronger through every sleepless night and setback, realized I no longer needed those words. Forgiveness is a strange, complicated thing. It doesn't mean pretending you were never hurt or that the wounds weren't deep. It means choosing to let go so those wounds no longer control you. I had carried their dismissals like weights around my neck for too long, driving myself to exhaustion to escape their labels. But now, standing where I stood, I could see that what truly defined me was never their opinions. It was how I showed up every single day despite them. And for that, I felt something unexpected, gratitude, because if they hadn't doubted me so completely, maybe I wouldn't have discovered how fiercely I could believe in myself. So I chose to forgive, not in some grand, tearful family reconciliation, but quietly within my own heart. I forgave them for not seeing my vision, for mocking what they didn't understand, for measuring worth by their narrow standards. And more importantly, I forgave myself for ever believing that their approval was necessary for my life to have meaning. Today, when I talk about success, I don't talk about the company I own or the empire I bought. I talk about the man I became in the process. Someone who learned to keep moving forward without bitterness, who found strength in vulnerability, and who finally understood that real triumph is becoming exactly who you're meant to be, no matter who doubted you along the way. Now, whenever I stand in front of a room full of young entrepreneurs, or even just sit across the table from someone nursing a fragile dream, I see the same flicker in their eyes that I once had, a mix of hope and fear, of daring to want more while terrified it might all fall apart. And every time, I feel this quiet responsibility to be honest about what the road really looks like. Because I know first, and how lonely it can be to walk a path that no one else believes in, especially when the loudest voices telling you it's foolish come from your own family. I tell them the truth, that you will be doubted. You will have people close to you who can't see what you see, who can't imagine your vision because it doesn't fit into the neat little boxes they're comfortable with. Sometimes those people will even be the ones you love the most. And yes, it will hurt. It will shake you right to your core, make you question your worth, tempt you to shrink yourself down just to win back a little of their approval. But I also tell them that every dream worth building comes with this test. The question is never just, can you succeed? The deeper question is, can you keep believing in yourself when nobody else does? Because the reality is, validation doesn't always show up when you want it to. Often, it only arrives long after you've walked through fire on your own. I've come to understand that being underestimated is one of the greatest gifts life can hand you, if you let it be. When people doubt you, they lower the bar of expectation. That means you get to build quietly, free from the noise of their constant scrutiny. You get to fail in private, learn in private, evolve in private, until one day you're so far ahead that even those who once dismissed you can't deny what you've accomplished. Their disbelief becomes irrelevant because your reality speaks so loudly. Most importantly, I try to show them that the real victory isn't in proving others wrong. It's in discovering who you are in the process. Because that's what sustains you, when the external rewards still feel miles away. It's knowing that you stayed true to yourself, that you didn't give up or dilute your vision just to fit into someone else's narrow view of what success should look like. That's a kind of pride no amount of money can buy. When people ask me why they should keep going, why they should keep fighting for a dream that even their own family laughs at, I tell them it's because they are the author of their own story. They can't hand the pen over to someone else, not even to a parent or sibling, no matter how loudly those people insist they know what's best. Because if you let someone else write your story, you'll wake up one day living a life that doesn't even feel like your own. And nothing is more tragic than that. So I encourage them to use every dismissive comment, every raised eyebrow, every offhand joke as fuel, to let it sharpen their resolve instead of shrinking it. Because one day they'll stand exactly where I stood on the other side of all the doubt, and realize that every setback, every bit of ridicule, was secretly forging them into someone unbreakable. And in that moment, they won't need anyone else's applause to know they've won.